Well, if you could keep that open, if you've got it open, that'd be great. Now, who is going to tell me what you can tell from my hands? Who's going to be brave? Yes. What? You're going to be rude? What? My age? Is that what you said? That wasn't in my notes. Actually, it was, you know. There we go. Well, how old do you think? No, forget that. Yeah, you get an idea. You get an idea of my age, maybe, from my hands. What else? What else? Eve, I think you're going to say something. They move? Yes. Sometimes they move. Bless, what can you tell from my hands? I have a ring. What does that give you a clue about, given where it is on my finger? I'm married, that's right. It tells you that I'm married for a long, long time. 36 years I've been married. And when I'm in for the long haul, I can tell you, because when I got married, I was about 20 kilograms less than I am now. So there's no way it's coming off. I mean, even if I want to take it off, which I don't, just to say. What else? What else can you tell? So we've got age. Thank you very much, sir. We've got age and yes. Oh, somebody's going to have to shout out. What's that? 10 fingers. This is true. Not in my notes, but it's true. It's true. What else? You can tell I don't work on a farm. This is true, and that was in my notes. Well done, Fiona. Yeah, guess what's in my notes? You can tell I'm sitting in front of a computer or reading a book or something like that. That is what I do. I'm not a bricklayer. You can tell from my hands, or I work on a farm. I don't do that either. Lilia, what do you say? I'm good at keeping my hands clean. You get an extra Easter egg from your parents for that. That is brilliant. Yeah, I'm good at that. Yeah. Bless, one more. What? Clothes. That's true. I mean, unrelated to my hand, but yeah. I tell you what else you can. You can tell from my fingers, can't you? That my identity. So if I got arrested and had my take my fingerprints, and that'll tell my identity. You can also tell my personality from my hands. How can you do that? If I was a very, very formal person, how would I say hello? Adam, come up here. We're very, very formal. How are we going to say hello? How do you do? No. How have you been brought up? It's Adam. It's how do you do?
Oh, yes, my liege.
Good example. That's correct. Correct. You can tell my personality. Or if I was super cool, which obviously I am, what would I do? What do you think? Yeah, we need a youngster up for this. We can't. Adam, no, super cool Adam. Who's gonna come up? Come on, Bless. Up. If we're super cool, what would you do? Bless, in South Africa, what would we do? We go like this. What? No, and then like that, and like that. Yeah, that's what we would do. What do you think? Or high fives, fist bump. Pwah! Yes. How about that? What are we going to do? High five. Oh. Let's try again. High five. Oh, no, listen, we're not all coming down, but one more. High five. Well done. Yeah, lots of sort of things you can tell about me from my hands. Well, what about Jesus' hands? What could you tell from Jesus' hands? That's a rhetorical question. If you don't know what that means, let your parents explain to that later. What can you tell from Jesus' hands? Well, one thing we can tell from his hands was that he died. He died. And so if you've got the text in front of you, you've got Mark in front of you, There's all sorts of things that we read in that passage. One, the most striking, of course, is that he was crucified. That is, he was nailed to a cross. Nails were put through his hands onto the piece of wood. He was crucified on the cross. And then, hanging there as he was for 3 hours, he could have hung there for ages and ages, but actually hung there for quite a short period of time, 3 hours. And on the cross, verse 37, it says he breathed his last, that last puff of breath that happens as you die. He breathed his last. And so he hung on the cross, and the hands of Jesus tell us that he hung on the cross, and then he breathed his last. And then the centurion who was there, Pilate was confused. The Pontius Pilate was confused because Jesus had died so quickly. And so he calls the centurion along to him, and he says, has Jesus really, really died? Is he really, really dead? It seems a bit quick to me. He's only been up there for 3 hours. And the centurion, who is a professional executioner, said, yeah, he really has. He really has died. And so Pilate then gives permission to Joseph of Arimathea to take the body down from the cross, the dead body of Jesus, and to put him into a kind of cave or a tomb and have him put there. And then what happens is that there's some women who have been hanging around. They've been seeing, they saw Jesus dying on the cross, and then they come and they see where Joseph has buried Jesus. And so that's one thing that we see from Jesus' hands. We see that he's dead. He died. And do you know what that means? That means access to Almighty God. If you've got the text open in front of you, have a look at verses 37 and verse 39. And imagine there's a camera at Golgotha, this execution, this place of execution. And the camera is on Jesus. And it captures Jesus breathing his last breath. He dies. And so there is the camera at Golgotha, the place of the skull. And the next thing that happens in verse 39 is that there's this centurion who's a professional executioner, and he says, he's just watched Jesus die, and he says, surely this man was the Son of God. And so that's what we see as we look through the camera at the cross. But then the camera does a very strange thing, or the camera person does a very strange thing. They go from verse 37 about a kilometer away to the temple. And the camera person focuses on the temple and goes into the temple where there is this really special place, the Holy of Holies, and next to it, the holy place. And between the Holy of Holies and the holy place, there's a curtain, a big curtain. And as the cameraman comes down to the temple, he shows the curtain in the temple being torn from top to bottom, being torn in two. And the Holy of Holies represents God. That is where God lives. And what we see is that because of Jesus' death on the cross, the temple in the curtain tears in two from top to bottom, which means we can go into God's presence. It is access. Because of Jesus dying, we can go into the presence of God. It's the most extraordinary thing. And so what's one thing that we learn from Jesus' hands? We learn that he died. He was really dead. Then what was the other thing, do you think, we learned from Jesus' hands? We learn also that he was alive. He's alive. And so on Sunday morning, if you look into chapter 16, on Sunday morning, the woman went to the tomb. And they got one thing on their mind. They say to themselves, who will roll the stone away. There's this big stone in front of this cave where Jesus is. Who's going to roll it away? This is on the Sunday morning. And yet when they get there, they see that the stone has been rolled away. There is no stone there. And why is there no stone there? Because a stone has been removed and Jesus is alive. He is not there. He is risen. He is not in the tomb anymore. In John's Gospel, this happens. Scene 1, it's evening on Easter Sunday. It's evening on Easter Sunday. And Jesus appears to his disciples. And they're amazed because he was dead and now he's alive again. And they can't believe it, but there he is. He appears to his disciples. But one disciple is not there. His name is Thomas. Thomas is not there. And so when Jesus goes, the disciples, a bit later on in the week, they say to Thomas, Thomas, Jesus is alive. He appeared to us. And Thomas says to the disciples, no way. I don't believe you. Why would you believe? Why would you believe? Dead people don't come back to life again. Thomas says, no. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and unless I see the hole in his side where the spear went, I will not believe, says Thomas. And that is scene 1. And then scene 2 is a week later. It is also a Sunday. And the disciples are all together in a room, and Thomas is with them as well. And Jesus comes into the room. Thomas sees him for the first time. And Jesus says to Thomas, Thomas, take your finger and put it into the hole in my hand. Thomas, take your hand and put it into my side. Thomas, stop doubting and believe. And do you know what Thomas says? Do you think he puts his finger in Jesus' side? His hand, Jesus' hands, his hand in Jesus' side? No, Thomas just says, my Lord and my God, because Jesus has risen. And so what does the cross tell us? The cross tells us that Jesus has died. So the hands of Jesus tell us that Jesus has died, and the hands of Jesus tell us that Jesus has risen again. He's alive. Let me tell you a story about Jessica. Little Jessica. Little Jessica was about 6 months old. Tiny little baby. And every afternoon, Jessica was put to bed upstairs in her house, and she went to sleep, whilst her mum went outside into the back garden and did some weeding and some gardening. And mum, well, there was the window up there, so mum knew where Jessica was. She couldn't see Jessica, but she could hear Jessica, and mum did the weeding and planted the flowers. And then one afternoon, when mum was out in the garden, she looked up to the window, and you know what she saw coming out of the window? She saw smoke coming out of the window, and her heart dropped, and she ran like Billy-O up into the house, up through the kitchen, up the stairs, up to the bedroom. But oh my word, she couldn't get into the bedroom because there was a fire in the doorway. But she had to get through. She had to rescue Jessica, and so she ran in through the doorway, through the fire, got a blanket, wrapped Jessica up in a blanket, and got her back out through the fire and into safety. She rescued Jessica. It was a wonderful rescue. But in the process, her hands were burnt. And they were horrible. They were horrible. They became all scaly and rough and hard. They were horrible, horrible hands. And you know, from that day on, because her hands were so horrible, she always wore gloves. Nobody ever was able to see her hands, Jessica's mother's hands. Well, one day, Many years later, now Jessica is sort of 8 or 9 years old. She had never ever seen her mum's hands. Can you imagine that? She'd never seen her mum's hands. But one day, she walked into her mum's room. She should have knocked on the door, but she forgot to knock on the door. She just walked in, and her mum was doing her makeup at her dressing table, and Jessica saw her hands for the very first time. And she went over to mum, and she looked at her hands, and do you know what? They were horrible. They were all scaly and rough and hard. And Jessica said to her mum, "Mum, your hands are horrible. They're all scaly and rough and hard." Well, that night, when Jessica's dad came home, Jessica's dad took her aside and told her what happened. Jessica never knew what happened, and he told her how there had been a fire, and her mum had run upstairs and run through the door, run through the flames, and rescued Jessica and brought her out. And as a result of all that, her hands were the way that they are. And do you know what Jessica did? Well, she ran into her mum's room, and she took her hands and she took off the gloves because she had put the gloves back on, and she held her hands and she said, "Mum, your hands are the most beautiful hands in the world." And Jesus' hands are more beautiful still, because they speak of the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus, a death and resurrection that gives us access into the very presence of God. They are beautiful hands. They are beautiful hands.